Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, Rose. How are you today?
Alaikum assalam, Samaya. I'm doing well. And yourself?
Good, thank you. So we've got Rose joining us all the way from Istanbul, and I'm so thankful that you could make it with us today. Well, it's your evening. So please, could you tell us more about yourself, what you do,
Yes.
your
So
background? Yeah.
where shall I start? Well, I'm from the United States, but I've moved to Istanbul about 3.5 years ago. Formerly, I was professor of religious and Islamic studies, but 2 years ago, I quit that and I decided to dedicate myself full time to building my own business as a life coach, writer, breathwork teacher, and I'm kind of making my life. I've built my life from almost scratch, you could say, making a move with myself and my now 10-year-old son across the world, and life is quite beautiful, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, you're so blessed to live in such a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, I
So,
feel grateful every time I go to the Bosphorus.
yeah. So you contacted me about sharing your story. I'm interested to know what is it that makes you want to share your story?
Yeah, great question. So, for anyone who finds me online, I'm quite open about various parts of my story. And the interesting thing is, until 3 years ago, I didn't share anything personal, period. I was very much a serious academic, and the only things I shared on social media were basically articles, analysis, teachings, very useful kind of ways of spreading awareness and education. But what happened is that as I've walked a healing path, I found out that when I started to share snippets of my story, it resonated with people and it really helped them feel like they're not alone. So I started a few years ago just to share little bits and pieces of my story, of the healing journey and my difficulties. I'm really quite vulnerable, so I talk about the hard parts as well as the beautiful parts, which a lot of people don't necessarily discuss, especially among Muslims. You don't find Muslims talking about the hard stuff. And I'm trying to do more and more of that, not because I'm going to overshare, but because people need to hear these stories. And I find there's a real need, especially among Muslims, to hear authentic life stories, journeys, so that people can realize that they're not the only ones, they're not alone, that others have experienced something similar, and perhaps to give them an idea of how they might navigate their own personal journey.
Mhm.
So why I reached out to you is because I found that you were talking about Muslim women who had gotten divorced. And interesting enough, although I share a lot on my social media, I haven't shared about my divorce yet. Even though I left my ex-husband, well, 6 years now, alhamdulillah. But I hadn't shared, and I don't know why exactly. Um, but I was like, okay, maybe this is a good venue in a place where uh people are specifically looking to hear stories of how Muslim women have thrived after divorce. So it just felt like the right venue to share because I've shared my story individually, privately with women who've gone through divorce. I've supported a lot of women through divorce, and they really benefit from listening to my story. So I was like, okay, let's try this and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I feel so honored that we are the first to receive this very personal part of your life. So where would you like to begin?
Hmm. Well, let's see. I would say that I ended up with someone who did not end up being good for me because it was repeating a pattern that I experienced in my childhood. I was raised in a divorced home. My mother and father got separated, divorced later when I was around 8 years old, and that was pretty devastating for me. My mother got most of the custody. I was only able to see my dad sometimes, and he was the parent who um, helped me stay sane during all those years, but I didn't get to see him enough. And I was raised by a parent who was mentally unstable and made my life very unsafe and um, ungrounded, you can say, so that I actually ran away from home when I was 16 to my dad's house. I ran away. It was planned with support from my counselor at high school and my dad, but I had to do it on my own, like make that decision. So I ran away to my dad's house and finished high school, never seeing my mother again, essentially, which is I've never also shared publicly because it's quite dramatic. And crazy in a way. Like I ran away, but I ran away from danger to safety because I knew I just couldn't live in a home that was so unsafe. Um, so I met my ex-husband when I was studying abroad in Egypt. In my third year of university, I went to Egypt and I was studying there. I was really enjoying my time exploring religion and spirituality, meeting lots of people, going on trips around the country.
I think we
Mhm.
forgot to mention that you were raised in another faith. You were not Muslim at the time.
Yes, yes, my family's not Muslim, and I decided to become Muslim when I was there, just because I was encountering a lot of people who really showed me the beauty of Islam. At first, I was not interested in Islam. I was purely interested in Sufism and Sufism minus Islam. But when I found Sufism with Islam, I was quite attracted to it, and I decided to become Muslim at that point in Egypt. And soon after, I unfortunately met my ex-husband, who was a scholar at Azhar University, and he was a calligrapher, and it was very, as a young new Muslim who, first of all, was very much fed up with the United States and really liking living in that part of the world, and just like when I wanted to leave everything behind and embrace everything in that part of the world. He was very interesting for that reason. But when I met him, it wasn't for romantic purposes. I was only 19, 20 when I met him, and I had no interest in men at that time. Actually, my goal was to be a Sufi aesthetic and just kind of spend my time worshiping the divine. But what happened is that I had a roommate at the time, and one day he was in my house tutoring my roommate in Arabic. And eventually he started tutoring me when I asked him, and then he started to teach me a little bit about Sufism and Sufi text and Arabic text. And through that, he started to teach me more about religion and spirituality, and I was very attracted to that. I saw it as a very platonic relationship of student teacher. Um, but unfortunately he had other plans that I was not aware of, essentially, and he had a Sufi sheikh, and together they managed to groom me at that young age to essentially think I had to marry him, even though I had no intention or interest in getting married at such a young age, at in such a strange way. um yeah, really. So I don't want to talk too much about how that happened because it's something I've never shared, and it's a little bit something I'm not ready to share all the details yet. But unfortunately, you can say I was groomed and manipulated into marrying this person who benefited greatly from our marriage. And I don't know if I benefited much, except alhamdulillah, I have a beautiful child from that marriage. But he definitely, his life circumstances changed dramatically from being married with to me. Um, I continued in Egypt for some years studying because I needed something to do, and then we moved to the US, and I was able to get him a job and help him get visas, and he was able to move. He came from a very humble farming background in the countryside of Egypt, and he was able to move to the United States thanks to me, basically, and me doing a lot of legwork and secretarial work for him so that he could move with me to the United States with a good job. And I was a PhD student when we moved to the United States. So that's kind of how it started, you can say. And I was very much under his very strong influence and that of his sheikh for many years, and very unaware of the whole situation. So when we talk about things like red flags and things like that, there was so many, but I didn't see any of it because I was completely blind to anything.
How,
And in the same, yeah,
how long were you married for?
quite a long time, like over a decade. Yeah.
Okay. And so would you like to talk about at what stage you started to realize that these were alarming signs?
Sure. So when we like the thing is I saw things that made me uncomfortable from before I got married. And when we got married, um it wasn't actually of my free choice, I would say. They had made me get married that day in Egypt. That was not in a full legal marriage, but it was the first step. And then in US, we got the full legal marriage. So then he could obviously immigrate to the United States. So even from the day I got married, I didn't want to get married. I was crying. Um, I didn't want to get married. But basically, he had cut me off and he told me not to speak to friends. All the friends I made in Egypt, he asked me to cut off all relationships with them. And he didn't really want me to speak to my family. For a number of years, I was very distant from my family and anyone I knew in the US, essentially. So I lived a very secretive life where I didn't really have anyone in my life. So now when I look back on it, I just feel so much compassion for that Rose, that former Rose, because she thought she was on this path of knowing Allah, but really she was in this path of being groomed to be used by her ex-husband and his sheikh essentially for many different things. And in the meantime, um, she had no idea. So some of the red flags, oh God, where do I start? Everything was a lie. Everything was a lie, first of all. For example, he did not ever let me meet his family. And I don't believe until now they really know I exist. They don't really know my son exists, for example. Now, this is really hard to share publicly because I always told myself, well, it can't be me. I'm so educated. Someone like me this can't happen to, but it happened to me. And I don't know why I tolerated that, except that I was just under so much strong influence from him that I put up with a lot of things I would never in a million years tolerate at this point in my life. But I just didn't know. And I didn't have a sounding board. I didn't have close friends because he had isolated me from everyone. So that's another red flag, isolating you from everyone. Really not having anyone I could depend on who I could trust to tell things to. So no one in my life knew what was going on. No one. Um, God, there's so many things. So, like on the Eid holidays and the big holidays, for example, he would just go to his village, and just leave me all alone. And I was like so incredibly depressed in Cairo, or I'd just be sitting alone in the apartment, and everyone was together with family. And I would just be incredibly lonely and depressed. And I just thought like this was how life was because I had never really experienced being treated well by my mother. My father did treat me well. My mother never really treated me that well per se, so that I assumed our marriage was okay because he didn't physically abuse me, he just abused me in every other way possible. But because I was so blinded about what abuse was, I really thought that because I wasn't being beaten, things were okay. And I was also being kind of strung along on the spiritual path and told that sometimes I was a bad person and I had to do these repentances and I had to obey him and the sheikh in order to find God essentially. And it feels really hard to share this publicly because I don't believe any of it at this point in my life. But at that time, I truly believed it, and it allowed them to have complete control over me and my thoughts and everything. Um, God, what wasn't a red flag? I think there's nothing that wasn't a red flag. Like it's pretty much he was just pure red, I would say, looking back on him and everything that I had to do everything. When we did the immigration papers, I did it all. The fact that he wouldn't marry me legally in Egypt, for example, that he would only get married to me legally in the US. The fact that I did all of his secretarial work. When he got a job, I did a lot of his work, his professional work. So I was like literally doing two jobs, my job and his job. The things like I would write his syllabi. He was an Arabic teacher in the United States. I would write his syllabi. I would write his emails. I was in charge of a lot of things that were in English. His English wasn't that strong. Um, what wasn't a red flag, really? I mean, I could just go on with 100, 200 things literally in our lives, of all the different kinds of abuse and flags that existed. Maybe you want to
Well,
add
if I
anything?
understand correctly, that you, on the day of your marriage, weren't feeling happy about being married. So
No.
you said that from the inception of the marriage, you were in a state of discomfort, unease, sadness.
Yes.
And because the state of unease was so familiar to you, given your background, did you think that you would just adjust, like this is how life goes, and maybe we would start to really love each other, like, to kind of rationalize the state that you were in?
Yeah, so they had manipulated me into thinking I actually loved him. I don't think he has any feelings. I think he might have some kind of sociopathic issues where he doesn't experience like deep emotions towards people, perhaps, and other mental health issues when I look at him nowadays. But I thought that I loved him. I thought I did, and somehow, for me, being loved wasn't how I need to be loved at this point in my life, right? So something was fulfilled in that it was it was the spiritual part of our relationship that felt more fulfilling than any other part. Um, really, and his sheikh can always it was more like a carrot and a stick issue of like always promising things and always we would talk about the Sufi maqamat, the Sufi stations that people progress on. They say you went up a little, but then you went down. And then they use that to say you've been bad, so now you have to like do this and this. to get better again. Make sure to listen to us and do this. So it was a lot of spiritual abuse and
Manipulation.
manipulation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was intertwined with a marriage that made it so toxic. Um, and I didn't know. And this is why it's so hard to share my story, but why I want to share the story because I know it's not uncommon. You know, you're probably on some of the same Facebook groups that I am with lots of Muslim women sharing their stories about these incredibly abusive husbands. And I see my story in their stories, and they have no idea. They're saying, my husband does this, like he flirts with all these girls in front of me, he does this and this. And they're like, is this a problem? Is this Islamically a problem? And I'm like, sister, wake up, leave. You know, and all the women on these Facebook groups are like, leave, go away, like run as far as you can. And the women can't see this. And that's why I feel called to share because people are like, oh, it can't happen to me. I thought, oh, it couldn't happen to me. I was literally a professor of Islamic studies, teaching about Islam, teaching about Islamic law, and not realizing I was in that kind of abusive marriage. It took so many years for me to realize that. And it can happen to anyone. It happens, doesn't matter how much education you have, what kind of family. I'm from a feminist household in San Francisco, California. I was not raised in a village in Egypt. I was raised in the most liberal environment in California where I was raised like female empowerment. Like I was not raised to enter this kind of marriage. I was raised to think that I would enter into equal partnership with a man when I got married in my 30s. Like that was my ideal for my family goals, right? And start a family later on. So how it happened didn't was not in the way I thought. But somehow they managed to tie me in really tight so that I didn't understand what was going on, really. And I found little ways to rebel within the marriage to hold on to small amounts of autonomy in very little ways. But it took a long time to wake up to the abuse I was experiencing.
So how would you claim your empowerment in your marriage?
Yeah, so like for example, when I was doing my PhD, you know, so I continue my studies, he would tell me, you know, you can stop, you can just stay at home. Well, first of all, one thing I was raised was not to be a housewife. You know, I could never see myself as a stay-at-home mom or housewife. He wasn't making enough money, but also I knew that if I gave up my ability to make money, that I would be fully controlled by him. Like I was already controlled by him a lot, but if I had no way to support myself financially and have money, I would lose everything. I would lose my complete autonomy. So the fact that I continued my studies, and I think perhaps what in one way for me doing my studies distracted me from him, and he was up to all kinds of things that I just didn't pay attention to because I was so immersed. Obviously, a PhD is very time consuming. I was fully immersed in that and not paying attention to, you know, him as much. Um, so doing things like that, like when I finished my dissertation and I was on the job market, I had a infant. I defended my dissertation when my son was 6 months old. He was not helping. I had to depend on friends for childcare to get the dissertation done. I had to then fly across the country 3 times for campus visits to get jobs, apply for jobs at universities. No help from him. I had to bring the baby with me. And I applied for jobs because he told me, "Oh, you could stay at home this next year, but then you'll be a housewife." And I knew that if I became a housewife, I would never have been able to leave that situation. So I knew I had to get a job. And it was incredibly difficult to go to these 3 campus visits with in physical difficulty with an infant, but I got a job. And it was only because of the pure grit and the need to maintain my financial independence that enabled me to do that. And towards the end of my marriage, I had a house at that time when I was in US. It came with a little studio that I had to like pay a lot of money and get a permit, and then I was able to rent out the studio in the back of the house. And once I could rent out the studio, I knew I could leave him because I did not need that extra income to pay my mortgage. So little things like that that I was carefully calculating in order to maintain my autonomy. And I did little things like that beforehand as well, but these are the some of the bigger things that I can recall.
So at what stage was that turning point? Because you said you were oblivious for the bulk of the marriage. And at some point you realize, okay, now I need to start carving away, making a plan,
Yeah.
or an exit plan.
Exactly, making a plan. Yeah, so we moved to the United States in 2008. And you know, things start to I'd say the cracks started to appear from the very beginning, for many reasons. Like, first of all, I saw the way he interacted with the United States, he was much weaker. In Egypt, he was at home, it was his country, he knew how to deal. But in the United States, his English is very poor, and I had to do everything. So I was like the man of the house, essentially. And, I already start to get disillusioned by him, and that's why I think I just put all my focus on my PhD because I just couldn't deal with him and his weakness, really, that he needed me to do his emails, like, his work stuff, just, like, everything. I'd prepare him for meetings, prep him what to say in English, these sorts of things. Um, so throughout my PhD, I was probably too busy to do anything to notice anything. But once I got my job in California, I was very busy because I had a newborn and a full-time, very demanding job. But little instances kind of started to show themselves to me. Like, for example, I went to this very short retreat with Muslims, and it sounds funny, but I had fun. And I was like, "Wait a minute. Muslims can have fun?" We are playing, like, silly games like Taboo and Mafia and, like, board games, and I had the most fun I had had in I don't know how many years, decades almost. It was so fun, and they're all Muslim. I was like, because my ex-husband is a very unfun person. He doesn't believe in fun. He always said the world's a prison, and we just gotta tolerate it and just live like the world's a prison. It was a very unpleasant way to live, to be honest. And when I had all this fun with this Muslim group of people, and these were really cool people, I was like, "Oh, like, that's okay, because he made it seem like everything is haram, like, fun is haram because you're not focused on Allah at every moment, but I was like, "Wait a minute, I'm with these group of practicing Muslims who are, like, enjoying themselves, and I'm laughing." I never felt so good. So that funny enough, having fun helped me realize that there was something wrong in my marriage because I never had fun in that marriage, like, there was no such thing called fun. Everything was a drag and difficult. There's always arguing. Everything became hard with him. Um, Having fun. Once I was able to leave my son with him for like 3 or 4 days, which was very difficult. He usually refused to do that and go to another retreat of academics. And this was a retreat for academics to learn how to balance work and life. So I had a lot of unscheduled time. I never had unscheduled time by myself. And it was so enjoyable. Just doing things and relaxing. That's when I made the first phone call to the only friend I really trusted, and I started telling her about my situation, and she started to tell me, "Rose, this is a problem. You need to leave him." And I was so scared to tell her. I thought she'd judge me. I thought the earth will open up and eat me. I didn't know what would happen, but nothing happened except that she told me she wants to help me leave, basically. So there's a few instances I was he had to move from Los Angeles where we had lived. Unfortunately, well, he had lost his job and he got a job on the East Coast, so he had to move across the country. And the year that he had moved, it was amazing. I started to feel happiness again. I always liken it to the Wizard of Oz. In the beginning, Dorothy's in Kansas and it's all gray, black and white, and then she goes to Oz and there's beautiful colors and the yellow brick road. And I just remember the year that he left to, we're still married, but he left to the East Coast. I noticed the spring wildflowers, and the spring wildflowers in Los Angeles are amazing. And I noticed how vibrant they were. I never saw them before. It was as if I was like a zombie, and I woke up to see the beautiful colors. I was like, "Wow, I love these flowers." I would just, like, look for the flowers everywhere, around me. So, I start to wake up that year. Some friends moved down the road, which never happens in Los Angeles, but they moved 2 minutes, 1 minute from my house, and they were newly married, and I got to see this beautiful newly married couple who interacted with each other in ways that I did not know was a way. Like, they're so loving to each other, and I didn't never had a good model for relationships. I didn't know that husbands and wives were loving. And it sounds silly because you would think I would have saw that, but I did not see that in front of me. So seeing them cuddle and, like, having public displays of affection and just, like, the way the husband would go into the kitchen and do things. I was just like, "Wow, this is amazing." Like, and they're Muslim, and I was like, "This is real?" Like, do I deserve that too? Like, What's wrong with my marriage? Like, why is my marriage nothing like this? So a lot of little things happened in my life, and I just noticed the world differently. And that's when I also started really to go in this healing path, intentionally seeking out healing modalities and therapy and really everything. I tried everything because I felt incredibly broken. I wasn't broken, but I felt just like shattered.
You were still
Um,
married at this point?
this was the year that he had to go away because he
Yes.
got a new
Okay.
job in the East Coast. So we were married. That was the year my tolerance level started to go down. I had like no tolerance. Um, that's next summer. I went to visit him where he was living, and I told him, "This is your last chance. Uh, and if you don't act if you don't respect me, if you don't show me that we should be married, I'm leaving you." By the end of that summer, 2018, I told him, don't come back to California ever again. I took my son and we returned to California without him, and I've never seen him since, actually.
And then post-divorce, how did you grow from that point of
Yeah,
having?
well, the beginning was really hard. Like, I wish I had known that I could have taken mental health leave. No one told me. And that fall after I left him, I was just a zombie. I just was completely devastated because I was like, okay, now he's not sending me money. I don't have enough money to survive, in Los Angeles and pay the bills. I've got a kid who I'm completely responsible for. I had to drive an hour to work, and it was really, really hard. So I was just like grappling with a lot of change, and I didn't have much support, just little support here and there. But I never, for example, my income wasn't high enough to afford a babysitter, so I never had a babysitter. I just always dealt with it. My son would come with me, and it was basically work and kid. So in the beginning it was really hard. And what happened? How did I just went to therapy. I tried a lot of stuff. I also went through many existential crises and very, very difficult dark nights of the soul, I must admit. A lot of times in the context of Muslim spaces, they say you can pray away your depression, pray away your anxiety, but for me, you can't pray away that kind of thing. You have to do a lot more work than that. And I went through very dark nights of nearly leaving Islam, nearly leaving everything, because I just felt so angry. I was angry at Muslims because the Muslim community I had been involved with didn't come out to support me, even though I had been a volunteer in the community and they knew me. No one ever asked if I needed help. That really felt like a betrayal in a way, that no one ever asked if I needed something, anything.
Did you previously ask them for help? I need some help. Can you help me?
I didn't know how to ask at that time. When you're in that state, I was incredibly hyper independent. So it's not a very good question to ask someone in that situation, because when you're in that hyper independent kind of like what's that state, like completely freeze, fight or flight state, you don't think to ask. Like, it's I didn't know how to ask for help at that point. Now I'm very good at asking for help, but that took a lot of work to ask for help. A lot of people do not know how to ask for help. So I don't always find it helpful to ask people, why didn't you ask for help? Because sometimes you just don't know. I was remember taught that you don't trust people. People don't want to help you. Like, I was taught that I have to give and give, but I'm not really able to receive. Like, it was bad to receive in a way. Like, I literally felt guilty to receive anything at that point. So I couldn't really ask. I don't know if I asked or not. Um, but people would ask me how I'm doing, and I would be pretty open about that. Um, so I didn't have a lot of support. I'd like here and there some friends, but not the kind of support. But a lot of girlfriends showed up. I'd like be on the phone for hours, and some girlfriends. There was a group of Muslim divorced women in Los Angeles that were supporting one another. So like little here and there, more women. It was a women-led support movement, really. That was in my. I had to distance myself from all men. I was angry at men. I was angry at Muslims. I was angry at the patriarchy. I was angry at a lot of things, and it's completely normal because my world had blown apart, and everything that I thought to be true was not. And I just didn't know what to believe, what was true. I was lucky to have found a Muslim counselor who helps people leave these kind of quote unquote Sufi cults and the indoctrination that happens to people. So this person was very helpful. I would call him and ask him, like, I was like, my ex told me this, the sheikh told me this. Is this true? He's like, no, no, that's not real, because I had to reprogram myself completely. So I would call a few people or text a few people I knew to be trustworthy and knowledgeable in a mainstream way. And I would just like run things by for them. I was like, I believe this. Please help me not believe it anymore. And what do I replace it with? So because I do have this analytical background of and being a scholar of religion, it's absurd that this happened to me, but it did happen to me. But because I have this background, I was able to essentially embark on a really active and intentional deprogramming mission and to basically empty myself of indoctrination and to replace it with other ways of seeing the world, I guess you can say. Um, it's amazing how the shift happened within a year or two, and most of the things that everything that he kind of told me that were false are gone, luckily. But I also had a lot of support doing that from various people.
How else did you heal?
How was I heal? Well, let's see. I did everything. So, like, I remember going to a Guatemalan shaman who did some kind of vaginal steaming healing thing. What else? I was up to everything. What else? The most profound healing modality that worked for me was somatic psychotherapy. And I had a Jewish therapist who also practiced somatic experiencing. She changed everything for me because I was completely in my head, very intellectual. That's why I didn't realize what was going on because I was just like in these texts, it was all about the mind. I was a person of the mind. And I didn't realize that my body, I was very unhealthy physically. Um, like for example, once I left him, I lost a lot of weight just by the fact because I left him. Like I didn't do anything. I was just happier and healthier. So learning to be in my body, to realize I had a body, I really didn't know I had one. I was neglecting all parts of my health, really helped me, and to express my emotions through my body was very helpful.
Can I
I
ask
had a
you,
yeah.
are you able to extract like a few salient points that you learned from the somatic healer that people could implement from now?
Yeah, because you can't think your way to a healthier you. You have to also feel your way. You have to learn how to listen to your body, how to express yourself through your body, and to honor your body because your body gives you data that's more true than your mind. Our mind can play tricks on us. It can tell us all these things that are just untrue. But when our body talks to us, is actually true. The body will tell you, you're tired, you need to rest now. You're in a place with these people who maybe you should stay away from these people, or your body will say, this is amazing, keep on doing this, right? So your body doesn't lie, and it's a very good thing to work on. Work on being healthy mind, body, and soul, and learning to understand what's going on below your head. Because Islam is a very embodied religion. We pray with our entire body, but most people pray mechanically and they don't actually experience the embodied practice of prayer, of salat, right? And so learning to be with your body, be in your body, and using it for your healing process is incredibly useful.
Mhm. Thank you. What else, would you like to add to the healing list, bucket list?
Yes, so all of the healing modalities I tried, and this is not even all of them because this is not including like speaking to friends. I have a lot of healer friends, so doing things on the side. Um, when I was at still working my full-time job, I also went to a psychiatrist and I got prescribed SSRI medication, which I had never considered in a million years. My ex was very much against modern therapy, Western therapy, so I never considered going to a therapist. I always tell people, I became Muslim at a very young age. It would have been really beneficial to have gotten a therapist before becoming Muslim because I thought religion would heal me, but religion doesn't heal you. You also need help. If I came out of a very traumatic, abusive home, I really could have done with a therapist. And Islam didn't help me in the way I needed because I didn't have the right support, right? So I went to see a psychiatrist and took SSRI medication. I hated it, but it helped. Why? Because I mentioned I was going through extreme existential crises. I was having major anxiety, panic attacks. Like I was just like breaking down emotionally, physically, in all ways. What it does, it basically I felt numb when I started taking it. I like it took me a long time to decide to take it, but I think in some situations it is incredibly helpful, and I think people should take it when they have extreme situations because I was so chaotic and I couldn't function well, and it helped me get to a norm that I needed in my life to function professionally, emotionally as a mother. I just wasn't functioning at all. And it helped my anxiety and my panic attacks lessen so that I could just start living normally. And thanks to working with my somatic therapist, I was able to work with her like for a year or two. Eventually, I could wean myself off the medication because I really don't like taking medication. I'm very healthy. I have a very healthy lifestyle, so I was able to wean myself off within a year, and I could stop taking it, thanks to learning somatic therapy. So that's why I'm a really big proponent of somatic work in different ways because it helped me not need medication. Now, some people might need it for much longer than myself, and I think that someone should always go to a medical professional, and I can't tell people to take it or not, but in some Muslim circles, they say people it's a sin or it's a bad thing to take medication. I think it's a good thing if you really need it, just to get back to normal, and then hopefully that person can find other ways to eventually wean themselves off medication. But it helped me. I got reduced medical leave during COVID for one semester, so I ended up teaching just one class and doing some other work, and that gave me the space to just breathe a bit more. I needed space, and during that time, end of 2020, with my son, we went for a lot of hikes, and I don't remember what I did, but it was a lot of rest and rejuvenation. I felt so much better. I was just so burnt out. I mean, I was going through intense burnout ever since my divorce up to COVID, and COVID exacerbated my situation and it got worse. If I look at my list, I had gotten 3 different therapists over the time. I had an Ayurvedic doctor I used to see regularly, and he used to give me a variety of different herbs for different situations for physical ailments. So that kind of helped me on my physical healing path. I had been seeing a chiropractor for many years because I have chronic back pain, and chiropractic care always was very helpful to me. And I see it as a form of self-care, like doing things to feel better because having intense back pain made me feel worse. So when I would go and seek help, um, I would feel better. I got all kinds of energy healings from different practitioners, Reiki, Sufi healing. If I met someone who did it, I was like, can you do it for me? I was not discriminatory. I would ask whoever I met, can you just help me? I was really, really hungry. I tried ecstatic dance, which, yes, for Muslims is maybe it's not the most, halal thing, but it's pretty halal. We would go to a dark room, and the why I like ecstatic dance is because it's a space where people do not drink or they don't allow substances, so no alcohol or drugs. You're in a dark room and you're just moving your body. It was so helpful for me. It just allowed me to free myself. I was in Los Angeles. I loved it. I would do it again probably if I found the right environment. I tried EMDR, which is a therapeutic method. I tried various Sufi healing practices from different people who would read different prayers and practices over me. I went to physical therapy, different than chiropractic care. And then one of the key modalities that I am now certified in is breath work. I discovered the power of the breath because a lot of these modalities are passive healing modalities, right? Where you need someone else to do something to you in order to feel better. But why, for me, somatic work is really great because I can do it on my own. I mean, it's nice to have a therapist in the beginning, but then you can learn how to do things on your own. And then when it comes to breath work, and that's why I am such a proponent of breath work, all of us breathe. All of us have lungs, inshallah too, and a diaphragm and a body, and we can learn how to breathe more optimally and in ways that can give us different states that can really increase our well-being. And so breath work was amazing. I remember the first time I tried breath work, and I tried it for a bit and in some online session during COVID or something. Like, wow, that feels amazing. And all I did was just change my breathing pattern. And then I started to get really serious and I found a teacher and I got certified and I've studied with various teachers over the years. And it's been incredibly empowering because it turns out that when you breathe in different patterns in different ways, you can have intense experiences. It can be almost like a drug-induced experience just by manipulating your breath, for example. But it's also those experiences are very healing and often can help people release trauma, for example. So one of the modalities I've been training with breath work is helping people release trauma through the breath. Um,
Are you
yeah.
able to share with us some tips right now about manipulating our breath to feel better?
It always starts with observation, right? So I'm actually giving a workshop this Sunday, for example, called Sufi Breathwork Workshop, because Muslims and especially Sufis have been very aware of the importance of the breath, and they pair the breath with zikr, right? So being aware of your breath, if you're a Muslim, is zikr, right? Because the goal of a Muslim is to be constantly mindful of our Creator, right? Of Ar-Rahman. And so the idea is if you can just start by noticing your breath as often as possible. Oh, I just breathe. Can you combine that with the name of Allah when you take that inhale and exhale? Allah, for example. And if you add that into your life as often as possible, that can even change your life by that very simple way to bring more mindfulness and to bring more zikr into your life. But some really simple things. So I've been a mouth breather for many years, and I discovered that mouth breathing is really suboptimal for health. And it took a number of months to train myself to start only using my nose for breathing, except in extreme workout situations, like going up a steep hill in Istanbul. I use my mouth. Otherwise, I use my nose. And even that small switch helped me feel better in my daily life. So it's really as simple as you're driving, you're on the bus, you're sitting somewhere, you're in line, and just like, oh, my breath. I'm inhaling, I'm exhaling. And when I'm inhaling, what's happening? My belly is expanding. When I exhale, my belly is contracting, right? So I don't want to introduce any particular practices, but it's really just noticing yourself. And that's what somatic work is too, is like realizing that you are a human who is breathing. You have this amazing microcosm of the world within you that is functioning. And when you start to contemplate your body and how it all functions together, like you breathe in through your nose and it goes down into your lungs expand, right? Your belly starts to expand because it's being pushed upon by the diaphragm. This amazing mechanism that helps us feel better. And if we learn how to elongate our breath and to inhale and exhale for longer times, that also increases our well-being, extends our life. Because a lot of people, when I diagnose them, they're breathing like this. Very quick inhales, very short exhales. It's all in the chest. This is a really bad way to breathe. And usually people like this experience anxiety on a daily basis and a lot of stress. And there's no way to de-stress yourself unless you first learn how to breathe in a way that is deeper, that is full bodied. Your entire trunk should be involved, like from here to your bottom of your belly should be involved in the breathing process. If you're breathing up here, you won't be able to get rid of anxiety just through medication, For example, you really need to learn how to bring your body into the healing process. So observation before everything and noticing and observing how you breathe and being kind to yourself as you breathe and combining that with zikr is the best way to start, really.
Fascinating journey. So somewhere along the line, you transitioned and moved to Istanbul.
Yeah. So I didn't intentionally move here. I came here for my sabbatical year. I received tenure in the United States at my university. And after tenure, you're allowed to go for 1 year on a sabbatical, which means a partially paid leave. And I wanted to go to my happy place, which is Istanbul. So I came here. And guess what? It's 3.5 years later, and I never returned. And I did quit that job because life got too good and too sweet. And I realized that I couldn't go back to that life where I didn't have the awareness of how burnt out I was in that job, in the situation of being a single mother in one of the most expensive cities in the world, was not working for me. So I decided to stay here. So I didn't intend to move here. I intended to come for 1 year, and I ended up staying beyond that year. And at this point, I don't really intend to move back to the United States. I find that I enjoy living outside the United States. So I really built a new life here in Istanbul. Yeah.
So I recently saw on social media that you attended a breathing workshop, I believe it was in Spain.
Mhm.
And I did see a little video where you mentioned that the practitioner, I think that everybody was outside in some scenic, beautiful place, and everybody had a shout at the top of their lungs, I want to live. I want to
Hmm.
live. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
And that,
correct.
I find that moving
Yeah.
because, and I remember you saying that it's so strange for us to, first of all, yell, and
Yes.
secondly, to say something like that.
Mhm.
And it did strike a chord with me, an emotional chord, because
Mhm.
why? I think it's because that is something that deep down we all want. And to just
Mhm.
declare that almost as like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I just find that there was something about it that was moving and powerful. Would you like to just comment on that at all?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me share about that workshop because it was really transformative. It was a training workshop, and that was in the mountains of Andalusia, or El Andalus, which obviously for a lot of Muslims has a lot of spiritual value. And it was with Sidi Abdullah Velasco or Sidi Abdullah Taufik, who is a Spanish Muslim convert. He's been Muslim a long time, and he's been doing breathwork for 40 years. This man is 80 years old, and he had more energy than any of us. And we were all much younger than him. I mean, I'm half his age, and his energy was off the wall. Like, mashallah, he is such a paragon of living the Suna way, I think. He just lives such a peaceful life. But because he's Spanish and not, he didn't grow up Muslim, he's also much more, how do I say, the way he interacts between genders is just very natural. There wasn't this strange way of interacting that Muslims, especially Western Muslims, have even more than Muslims in this part of the world have. It's just like very awkward. Often I find like Muslim men won't always speak to Muslim women, even though professionally they might speak to women all the time, but they won't speak to Muslim women. It's just very odd, right? And he didn't have any of this. He just treated us exactly the same. And so, first of all, that was very weird because I was like in shock. I was like, "Oh, you're treating us the same. Like we get to be doing the same thing and expressing ourselves similarly, right? We would wake up, pray Fajr. It was kind of cold, even though it was May, and then we'd do like an hour and a half of breath workouts, and he was leading us like on, he called his style breathing called fitra breathing. So he's like, we need to breathe in the way that's natural to humans that we lost along the way. So he tries to bring people back to fitra. So we'd be doing these like really wild exercises, you like moving our body and going, hey, hey, and different kinds of things. Is very like strong, very masculine. Definitely like, when I teach Sufi breath work, it's I'd say a more feminine approach to it. It's a little less kind of that masculine energy, but I still appreciated it. And to engage in these practices in a mixed group was very healing. I don't think I've ever encountered that in a Muslim setting before. And to see Muslim men who are also on their healing path and who experience healing breakthroughs under the guidance of this teacher, and he supported them through it. And some of the women also had breakthroughs. Was very powerful for me. And just learning from this master, because all of my previous breathwork teachers are not Muslim, they're deeply spiritual people. When I got certified in breathwork, I made it my project to study Sufi approaches to breathwork. So I was studying some Sufi treatises on the breath and then making my own project around it. But they had no knowledge. But it was so amazing. And he was the only person I found who consciously practices and teaches breathwork for Muslims and who attaches Islamic way of understanding the breath to it. So that was very powerful. And if anyone ever has a chance to go to Spain and study breathwork with him, I highly recommend. He also does healing sessions, and they're out of this world. I don't know how to describe what he can do, but I've had many. I forgot to mention I've had many one-on-one breathwork healing sessions from various people, too. That was one of my modalities because there's doing breathwork to yourself, and there's also people guiding you through very powerful breathwork experiences, and he definitely is a powerful healer as well.
Thanks.
Yeah. And he made us scream out loud, and he told all of us to stand upright with our chest kind of like expanded and to have really good posture. And I was like, wait a minute, Muslim women were always like taught to like be scrunched over and to be small and not to kind of show anything. So when you're like this, like, our curves are showing more, but this is actually the fitra way, because he was studying the way the descriptions of the Prophet in the Sunnah, how he acted, how he walked, how he sat, how he breathed. And so he studied in detail all of his life and description of how he was. And he's like, Muslims need to stand upright, our chest expanded. It also helps us breathe better. And I was like, wait, you're teaching me to like do this? Like, but I'm a woman. He's like, yeah, everyone needs to act the same because to breathe better, we need to be in our power. We need to be grounded. We need to allow our chest to have full expansion. And actually, the way Muslim women are very disembodied because we don't want to be seen, that our bodies are kind of off limits, but also harms us in a way. And I think it's very possible for Muslim women to learn to be modest, but also in their power and also fully embodied. And I think this is what is missing in a lot of Muslim contexts is that people often just receive knowledge from teachers, but not embodied knowledge. And that was what's so exciting was receiving embodied knowledge and learning that, oh, I can stand like this. I can scream in front of men, like I want to live and like screaming and he would say louder, louder, louder. I'm like so awkward. And it felt amazing. It was so powerful. And so yeah, I hope
Beautiful.
everyone can have that experience.
Yes. In closing, anything you'd like to say?
We've
Maybe
covered a
fun.
lot of things. I would say that everyone heals on their own time. Some people need a decade or 2 decades to heal from divorce. And I think you need to allow yourself that time and space. For me, my journey was a very active one because I just wanted to speed it up and I did a lot of things. I don't think most people should take the path I did. I often do, the I make dramatic life choices, moving across the world with my son during COVID. I do very dramatic things. I think most people should not do what I did. But I think if people can find a couple of different healing modalities in their process that are supportive of them, that feel good to them, that can help them in their healing journey. And give yourself the time and space and try to find ways to have time to think and process. Because when we're always on the run, when we're always burnt out, we can't make good decisions. It's only when you have time to be in your body, to think and reflect, then you can make really good decisions too.
Thank you, Rose. It's been so interesting. And I wish you and your son all the best in your journey ahead.
Thank you, Barakallah Fiki, Sumaya, for having me on.